William Jewell, along with the rest of the United States, was captivated by stories from Europe during the outbreak of the war in 1939. The United States had committed to helping the Allies, but would not commit completely to the war effort. Americans had split ideas on the U.S. and how they should help the war effort. William Jewell College was no different. Some believed that an active military involvement was in the best interest of the United States, while others believed that it was merely time to avoid the wars in Europe and help with raw materials for the Allies. The best way for the opinions of the student body to be voiced and heard was through the newspaper, the William Jewell Student. Before we describe the ideologies of the students of William Jewell, some background information will make the situation clearer. Jewell is located in the heart of America, in the city of Liberty, Missouri. Jewell was founded in 1849 by members of the Missouri Baptist Convention. Construction of the school started off a donation by William Jewell, physician, legislator, and most importantly for the documentary, a Baptist layman. Jewell had, from its initiation, a close association with the Missouri Baptist Convention. This close affiliation lasted for over 150 years, until Jewell's removal in 2003. When creating this documentary, this group was fortunate enough to be introduced to William Prather. William Prather is a veteran of World War II and an alumni of William Jewell. This man was a great deal of help to this group, and without him, this presentation wouldn't be nearly as good. William Prather was born and raised in Excelsior Springs, Missouri, and attended William Jewell and was a volunteer in World War II. Prather was born on March 4, 1924, and enrolled in 1942. In the winter, Prather volunteered to join the Army Air Corps and left Jewell to train outside St. Louis. In 1943, he was sent to a college detachment training in Ashland, Wisconsin. He trained to be a pilot in Santa Ana, California. Prather was top of his class and was the first student to fly solo. As the war in Europe would presumably be over by the time Prather would be trained and ready to go there, he primarily focused and was trained for the CBI, China, Burma, and the Indian Theater. Unfortunately, Prather didn't end up in Asia. Prather flew cargo planes to Germany carrying displaced people back home. William Prather was part of the last American operation in France and was one of the last soldiers to be sent home. Prather returned to Jewell to continue his education. He received a major of economics, history, and political science, along with being a member of the Sigma Nu fraternity.
The college that I was in was up in Wisconsin, Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and but it was a school for the aviation people who had enlisted in the Air Corps, and so they taught everything, a lot of things, refresher courses to help you when you got on into their programs. And you always took off into the wind, and you always searched the skies to be sure you weren't taking off when somebody was coming in to land, because the landing aircraft always had right-of-way. Well, anyway, you pull up on the 45-degree angle to the runway you were going to take off on, and you'd run your engine up, full throttle, and then check your mags. It's like a spark plug, in other words. So each engine had sort of like two spark plugs, and you're checking on check both spark plugs. So if one set failed, you had something to fall back on. Well, anyway, I cleared all that, got ready to take off, and no communication now, see, between the guys that stand on the perimeter and me and this airplane. And I you towed the brakes by tapping the toe, the top part of the brake. So you're towing the brakes, and you've got your stick back, and you're giving it full throttle, and it's just sitting there shaking. It's not moving. You couldn't figure out why it wasn't moving. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And to make a long story short, what had happened, the tail wheel was a swivel tail wheel. And when I had taxied up and set it on a 45-degree angle with the runway, the tail wheel had swung around and dropped into a gopher hole. So the plane wasn't going to move. It was locked into that gopher hole. It was successful. I had 3 good landings and 3 good takeoffs and solo. We flew into situations where we would pick up wounded soldiers and fly them back to Paris, where they were flown from Paris back into England for special treatment and surgical procedures. Mm-hmm. We flew displaced personnel that had been held as slave labor in Germany back to their relative homes. And that was those were sad situations to see, because they were emaciated, they hadn't eaten properly, when they were lined up to get on board our planes, it was like cattle in the field to go to the restroom, to do anything. Bad things.
The William Jewell student had a major role in voicing what the students of William Jewell thought about the war, along with publishing information about the war. In 1939, a poll was taken of Jewell students pertaining to what the United States should do regarding the war. 82% of the students believed that the United States should get involved in the war with active military involvement if the United States was attacked. 68% of the student body supported eliminating the restriction of selling supplies to the Allied forces. This policy the United States had enacted would later be called cash and carry. We would supply the Allies, but they had to pay for it immediately, and they had to come to the United States and transport it themselves. Concluding this poll, 18% of the student body said the United States should enter the war in the event that the Allies were threatened with defeat. As these polls state, the campus was only in partial agreement on what the United States should do.
In fact, Jewell had a program at just about the same time.
In the naval flight program?
That's right, yeah. And most colleges had college programs of some kind to offer refresher courses, if it was math or chemistry, physics, or whatever the field of interest was that the guy was enlisting for.
To better explain how Jewell's role as a Baptist institution was the role of the conscientious objector to the war, this topic was quite controversial at Jewell. Many ministerial students stated that they would not partake in the conflict and would not enter the war if drafted because of their strong Christian-centered views and beliefs. While the role of conscientious objection at the start of 1940 was small in number, with only 2 people publicly stating their beliefs on the war in the second issue of the William Jewell Student, it quickly increased. By the 20th issue of that same year, the number of conscientious objectors had grown to 28. This led to obvious conflicts of ideals, with one side objecting to the war on the grounds of Christian beliefs, being opposed by those who took the stance with the ideals of joining the war effort because of a patriotic duty. To continue with the debate of conscientious objection and American duty, an interesting event took place on the campus during the 1940 school year. The campus had been covered in pacifist handbills, resulting in a tremendous uproar from the pro-war and pro-support students on campus. The students who found themselves on the side opposing the objection to the war called for the culprit of the handbills to be caught, tarred, and feathered for their action. Although the side of conscientious objection was one of merit, faith, and courage to stand on, it was greatly outnumbered by those who supported the involvement of the United States in the war.
They were known as conscientious objectors.
Yes, sir.
But those were boys maybe who used being a ministerial student. Some of the guys that weren't interested in studying ministry used to joke about these guys that were signing up to be ministers. It was their way of dodging, some of their ways of dodging an enlistment, see what I mean, or a draft selection. But they weren't prominent on campus. You didn't hear that unless you were talking privately. The endeavor was to be solid and to be firm, to be aggressive in what we were wanting to do, defeat Germany.
One of the more interesting and notable students that entered Jewell during his time before the United States entered World War II was a young man named Joseph Katz. Katz was just like any other student at Jewell, except for the fact that he was a German Jew. Katz had escaped Germany through Switzerland after the capture, imprisonment, and release of his family by the Third Reich. While at Jewell, Katz gave several presentations on life in Germany under Adolf Hitler, the war, and the nature of Nazi Germany. According to one of Katz's presentations at Jewell, where he described his own interpretation of Hitler and the Third Reich, the German people at this time viewed Hitler as more of a deity than a leader. Many saw him as the savior of a once devastated Germany. Because of this view of Hitler, he could do no wrong, just like any other deity-like figure can do no wrong. Because of this, Katz elaborated that the German people followed and supported Adolf Hitler regardless of his actions. Katz was only at Jewell until 1941, when he graduated with a degree in Greek and philosophy. Although Katz was only at Jewell for a short time, his influence was tremendous in properly explaining what life was like in a Nazi-occupied Germany.
Bartering. The Germans believed in bartering. The Americans never did. The Americans always considered it as black, black market. So anyway, during the occupancy of the German troops or American troops, I think the people got along probably better under the Germans because they could barter and get what they didn't have or couldn't buy, or by trading, see.
In 1941, the role of Jewell and the war increased significantly with the addition of summer courses. The aim was to graduate students faster in order for them to enter the U.S. workforce or military. In addition to the year-round schooling, Jewell was gearing up for war. New physical fitness programs were implemented. In addition to courses on campus, a temporary program that shipped students to Nebraska for a few months for them to work in an ammunition plant making war materials was offered to students. Jewell participated in war stamp drives, bond sales drives, and a scrap collecting contest was held. The work was being put in on Jewell's campus to help the war effort in any way that they could. One of the largest contributing factors that Jewell participated in, and in the end changed the landscape image and ideals of Jewell for the foreseeable future, was the CAA, Civil Aeronautics Administration, a naval flight school program that was awarded to Jewell.
Not like it is today, the semesters. And every other person on the campus was a the word I want what's the word I want to use for encouraging someone to join a
recruiter?
The recruiters. That's what it was. You had recruiters for every branch of the.
While many were beginning to train on the campus of Jewell, others were already committing themselves to the war overseas. As in any war, many brave young men and women give the ultimate sacrifice of their life. The community of William Jewell was no different than any other city, town, or state in the United States in this regard. Many students fought across the sea in the Pacific Theater, as well as in Europe. The first Jewell casualty was Eugene Amick, who was killed on September 3rd in 1942. Japanese cruisers attacked Amick's cruiser. The most likely reason to his death is that it caused Amick's hangar to explode. Eugene Amick had graduated from William Jewell the previous year in 1941. Amick was a well-known student around campus, mostly known for being the former president of the Phi Gamma Delta fraternity. Amick served as a pilot on the Astoria in the Pacific and was killed in the Pacific Battle of Savo Islands. In 1943, a destroyer was named after Amick for his service in the Pacific Theater.
There was more gentleness, I think, in the feelings of people. Already we were losing sons and boys to service. Different people were talking about what they wanted to do and where they were going to serve and all this. It was sort of like a torpedo boat, from the way he described it to me. They were fast, inboard engines, and had torpedoes on board and mines, and they were dodge in and out of traffic, all of this stuff, quick and easy. So he was telling me, he says, man, did they sound great. You go down to the harbor in the morning and you could hear them. They already started the engines that were diesel engines, and you could hear them boom, 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 boom. He says, man, that really turned me on.
3 weeks later, at the end of September 1942, Lieutenant Richard T. Sharp, another Jewell graduate, was killed in a non-combat crash in the Pacific. Jewell had brave men and women fighting and training all over the war. When focusing on the ultimate sacrifice that some made, it's easy to overlook the accomplishments of students and alumni. One of the highest accomplishments ever seen by an alumni of William Jewell would be the accolades of Hugh Mayberry, Hugh Mayberry graduated from Jewell in 1914 and was promoted to Brigadier General and Commandant of the Camp Hood Tank Destroyer School of the 99th Division by the end of 1942. Mayberry would be the highest-ranking Jewell official to serve in World War II.
I was there actually during the time of the Battle of the Bulge. It was at the very tail end of the events, but I was in the theater at that time.
The Naval Flight School engulfed the campus of William Jewell in the year during World War II. The campus landscape was changed and Jewell became a gear in the war machine. The presence of an increased number of people on campus affected many aspects of life at Jewell. Buildings were taken over to house the extra men on campus, including the fraternity houses, the president's house, and some of the dormitories. This school's purpose was to teach the basics of flight, ground instruction, and mechanical knowledge to young cadets. The pilots that attended William Jewell received 3 months of academic work. The cadets then moved on to the elementary flight and ground instruction schools for 2 months. The Navy school located at Jewell was a war training service school where civilians served as teachers for the pilots.
We learned code, we learned just a lot of things. Map reading, mathematics, like I said, physics, chemistry, and just refreshing on just many subjects. And there were 3 cadets per room, like a motel, and your bath and shower and stool was in the bathroom, was in the center between these 2. So in other words, it was only at nighttime is when you had 6 people in the area. British colleges like at Jewell in the Navy program that they were having, or Oshkosh where I was, they had a lot of guys that would sign up for the Air Corps, but they didn't. But no one, you couldn't sign up to be a pilot or a co-pilot, a bombardier, or a navigator. You just went into a pool.
Beginning in 1943, 2 years after the United States declared war on Germany and Japan, Jewell was once more host for another Navy flight program. The second program differed greatly from the one that had been on Jewell's campus earlier. The program had over 600 individuals at a time. In order to house all the soon-to-be pilots, the students of Jewell were shipped off campus to devote the entire Ely building to the naval cadets. The Brown Hall Gymnasium and all of Marston Hall, including the office of current Jewell history and life professor Dr. Christopher Wilkins, were taken over to be used by the Navy. At this point, this was the height of involvement by Jewell in the Great World War. The entire campus had been taken over to educate and train the pilots who would defend democracy and freedom all across Germany. These were the men and women that the citizens of the United States were instilling with the sacred duty of protecting the homeland abroad. This was Jewell standing up to help in any way that they could to support the efforts of the United States. The Naval Flight School brought an important economic boost to the William Jewell and Liberty, along with its boost in naval cadets. Jewell was awarded $37,000 from the Navy annually for its role in the flight school program. The flight school also brought a tremendous economic boom for the town of Liberty. A new dance club and a new Coke bar were built for the students, teachers, and ordinary Liberty citizens to enjoy. The school that initially started with 18 total teachers had made its way all the way up to 46 instructors. This school was now a full-blown operation that took over the William Jewell campus. Everything in a normal day changed for the average Jewell student. Cadets were marching the quad, planes were being worked on in the middle of Ely Triangle, and a 100% committed school was born with one goal: to defeat the Japanese and the Germans. This school was reborn from a small Baptist liberal arts college to a full-blown military institution with patriotic duty flowing through its veins. With the war coming to an end, Jewell had to reverse its ongoing process to militarize the students. The goal was to return the campus back to its initial pre-war norms. In the 6th week of 1945, the construction of a new administrative building, Green Hall, began in order to cope with the amount of returning soldiers that would be attending Jewell. The Navy School at Jewell would end up departing from the campus in December 1945. Because of this, the 1945 football season was canceled due to a lack of players. Old faces returned as the military disappeared, and soldiers returned home from active duty. At the conclusion of the 1945-1946 school year, Harry Truman arrived on campus for the Jewell graduation and was awarded an honorary degree.
We moved fighter groups that were closer to Berlin, moving up, always moving toward Berlin to try to get there. And we didn't beat the Russians there. The Russians beat us to Berlin. Went back, and in 2 years and 2 summers, got out in '51. I majored in economics. That were in the different branches, because different branches were getting out of service. Everybody didn't get out at one time.
Yeah.
So in 1946, when I got home in the middle of the year, I started back to school. I was a Sigma Nu, and stayed in the house.
In the fall of 1946, Jewell broke its record with 726 students enrolled, 414 of which were freshmen. Out of these students, 375 were veterans from the war. The growth that occurred at Jewell was typical to smaller colleges all around the country. Soldiers came back with their GI Bills, a way for the U.S. government to pay for soldiers' schooling once they returned from conflict. With this growth came many changes, including several new Greek organizations. The Student Senate saw a complete reworking, and the newspaper no longer had shortages of writers or subscribers. All in all, we see the change in mindset of Jewell switch to how it is today. It was a very sudden and abrupt change at William Jewell. The mindset of doing everything and anything needed to help the war was no longer necessary. Instead, a change back to a relatively normal state would take place. Obviously, this would be difficult for many of the soldiers who returned to Jewell. A life once full of action and adventure was replaced by one of tremendous normality.
Paid for your, what was that called?
The GI Bill?
The GI Bill. Of course, that's most of these colleges that were struggling say in the mid-40s, mid to late 40s, financially struggling. This GI Bill opened the door and paved the way for them to open their campuses, to enlarge their campuses, their curriculum. It was a godsend, really, to a lot of small colleges. And I think that Jewell probably was fortunate themselves at that particular time. Our whole house was filled with basically returnees.
Mm-hmm.
I had a good buddy, he was a Marine, by the way, and he was shell-shocked. He used to always say that we had seen our better years.
Jewell was transformed greatly due to the amount of involvement the institution received during the war. Prior to the war, Jewell was a typical Baptist school with students who had the same typical cares and troubles students have today. This all changed after World War II as we saw soldiers walking the quad in tight formation. These patriotic beliefs that came with the war sometimes clashed with strong Christian beliefs and values. Multiple students went to serve in the war, and various faculty members who served had great influence over students' education and lives later on. Even though Jewell is a small school in the heart of the Midwest, the students and community were greatly affected by the war that ensued. This campus came together to prepare a solid and united home front for the men and women that would go overseas to fight for the freedom we have today. Jewell was small in number, but excelled in heart, generosity, and love that is needed to not only survive the war, but also the hardships that come with sending young men and women to fight when their return is not a certainty. This school showed what it means to be United Americans. The community stepped up and did the duty that their country desperately needed of them. William Jewell College, its students, and its faculty made the United States proud and gave all the members of this group a little more pride and love for the institution we are lucky enough to be a part of.